So today I'm going to be conducting my first interview on the Alchemical Science channel. The channel currently just acts as a record of my research and ideas, but I'm hoping to also use the platform in the future to interview other scientists who've influenced my research. So that's what today's video is going to be. So for this first interview, I'm really grateful to have with me Brian Keats. And Brian's well known in the Biodynamic Circles as the man behind the Antipodean Astro Calendar, which is a calendar that many biodynamic growers and winemakers, etc. use to calculate ideal planting times and ideal harvest times and ideal wine processing times and things like that according to the solar, lunar and planetary cycles. And he's been compiling and producing the calendar for 36 years now. So as you can imagine, he's gained a wealth of knowledge from his decades of research, naked eye astronomy, and close observation of weather patterns and natural cycles of animals, humans, and plants. So as is often the case with those in the field of biodynamics, Brian's also a student of the teachings of anthroposophy and Rudolf Steiner. So like myself, a self-professed alchemist, he has quite a different perspective on how science can be practiced than the mainstream does. So I initially contacted Brian asking to interview him regarding the Astro Calendar, just as a follow-up to my previous video tutorial on using it to plan planting times, which you can find on the channel as well. And I do have a couple questions on this for Brian a bit later on in the interview. But after further exploring Brian's other interviews and written material, I decided that it'd be more valuable to spend some of this time really exploring the depths of his knowledge on a range of related topics. So there's very few people who can speak with clarity on the broader field of occult science and philosophy, and I believe that Brian is one of the few people who can do it really quite well. So without further ado, we'll jump into the interview with Brian. I somehow didn't record the first few minutes of it. The recording didn't work, so we've skipped the introduction, but that's a bit of an introduction, and then we're straight into my first question. Otherwise, enjoy. So, I thought we'd start off where your interview with the Biodynamic Guild left off. So at the end of that interview, you mentioned that the world's currently in a bit of a dead state, in the sense that our race, human beings, have lost our life or our spirit or our soul. You know, how you can tell me how you want to describe that. But referencing, of course, you know, the current collective state of the human consciousness, the massive social and economic upheavals that we're currently going through, future with no jobs, a loss of meaning and purpose for many people around the world, and the deeper meanings of all of these things, which are perhaps symptoms of. And this resonated really strongly with me. And I don't think a dead state or a case of widespread waking unconsciousness would be an exaggeration. So can you tell us a little bit more about how we've come to this global dead state on a large scale, both from the perspective of, you know, what influences in the skies play into this situation that we're living out, but also just in a general, broader philosophical sense based on your own broader research?
Well, I think it's to gain a perspective for me is helpful, get a sense of the future. And so by analogy, I could say when we were children, when we were babies, we very much relied on our parents. Mm-hmm. We were held in their arms and we were carried about. And then in sort of primary school, they were our guides. We depended on them for our moral values, for our developing habits and things like that. When we got to adolescence, we started to challenge our parents and not really want to be babies anymore. So we had a bit of conflict that goes on with parents. We come to late adolescence, and we kind of don't really want to know what our parents' values are. We think we know everything. And yeah, it's pretty chaotic in this late adolescence. But hopefully, yeah, we have to break away from the parents, become individuals, to become adult to adult and relate to them differently from parent to child. And if we look through the journey of the human being in the last 10,000 years, say. 10,000 years ago, we were kind of babes in arms of the gods. They set our values, they guided us. We weren't individuals, we weren't free. We were kind of puppeteered by the gods. They were like our parents. Mm-hmm. And then we had to become free. We had to distance ourselves from the gods. We had to lose connection to the spiritual world slowly, to become independent and hopefully in the future become co-creators. But we go through, I describe our civilization now as late adolescence, where we think we know everything and we're making a great big mess of the world. But hopefully the values were installed in us when we were children. We can go through into mature later into adulthood and become productive human beings, and perhaps in the future become co-creative with spiritual beings.
Yeah.
The analogy is helpful that we have to go through this, become self-conscious and free, and make our own choices between good and evil. And having battles of evil gives us a soul strength. So it's more, in this day and age, it's a battle for the soul. And a lot of human beings in a privileged situation that are in warfare. That's the battle for the soul, and not for physical strength or that kind of power. So for me, I have hope for the future, and that we can get through our late adolescence in our journey towards becoming human being. I don't feel we're human beings yet. It's a journey. Yeah. And we have to go and separate from the gods, separate from the spiritual world, and then choose to find our way back to it. Or not.
Yeah, I mean, do you think is this something that the collective needs to do together, the human race, or is this something that's going to happen on an individual level, despite what the collective does, do you think?
Well, we're not human being without the other. There's no point individuals going their own journey and saying, I'm all right, I'm sitting on top of a mountain, I'm connected with the spiritual world, I'm okay. It's a journey for all of us to go on and not necessarily make, but it's also part of being a human being is being realizing you're nothing without the animal kingdom or the plant kingdom or the earth, let alone spiritual beings.
Yeah.
To refine that, the stars, the planets, is all part of us.
I guess, yeah, that's part of this realization then, and how to kind of get out of this dead state, is that everything will kind of come along, or everything needs to go together, rather than just people launching out on their own and trying to become spiritualists. So you also mentioned at the end of that same interview that birth and death are two thresholds of time that we must cross. And this is also something I've spent a lot of time considering myself. I don't know if you've read the old dramatic poem Raymond Lully's Great Elixir, but that really got me thinking about this whole story of the alchemist who's told by his beloved, that if he can create the philosopher's stone, and then at the end of this lifetime, when her husband passes away, she'll be with him, and he goes ahead and he does it. And then when he goes to see her, she says, actually, I just want to get out of this withering, decrepit body. Please just let me leave. And then he ends up living forever, and kind of having to deal with those consequences of seeing everything around him, die, everything he loves, having to learn to move on, I guess, from, that those experiences of life he'd had. And so again, this kind of got me thinking, well, I'm eternal, at least that's my viewpoint on it, and I'm going to have to deal with partings and new adventures at some point in my never-ending experience of consciousness. And again, this got me thinking that perhaps this is the reason why we need to forget everything every time we die, because it'd perhaps be too painful or too difficult to remember everything, unless we could find a way to deal with all of those feelings and existential problems during this lifetime and accept a reality where we're not identifying ourselves with the temporary, the physical, the subtle. So do you have any kind of thoughts or realizations around that topic? And I know that's a really kind of broad comment and question.
Um, Nothing necessarily new or original, but in the sense that, well, everything that we can see with our senses has to die. But also, when we're in the spiritual world, we see all our past lives, and we see everything. So nothing's literally forgotten. So the Indian term for like everything's in the Akashic record that's ever happened. But we have to, for the most part, for most of us, have to forget when we incarnated. We just wouldn't be able to cope with the things we've done in the past. Until we're strong enough to do that, then our angel looks after our memory of all those things. But we certainly experience it after death. Those, it's brought vividly to us to then try to make amends to some of the things we've done, or plan our future lives, who we need to meet. And so, don't in the long term, we don't forget. It's just until we're ready, when incarnated, have the strength enough to meet what we've done in the past.
So that's a bit of kind of a primary purpose, perhaps, of these lifetimes that we're living out now, is to come to terms with those things, or, to be able to eventually cross those boundaries. Like, I guess, is there a way that we don't go through this cycle anymore? Is this part of this evolution of human consciousness that we don't necessarily have to forget each time, that we don't have this kind of dramatic crossing of the boundary to a new experience?
Yes, until we can attain the state of, if you like, a kind of a Buddhahood, where then it's not necessary, but we've still got many incarnations to come to that sort of stage for us ordinary people. Yeah. Unless you initiate, you can access that now. But I'm certainly nowhere near anything like that.
Me neither.
But yeah.
But it's a goal. It's somewhere where we're kind of eventually maybe heading. At least one of the paths we could take.
Yes, that's one of the main paths we've come to take. But also, it's only when incarnated we can get a sense and get to know the being of love, if you like. What can be called Christ in some, in most Western sort of traditions. But if we can't sort of work on ourselves and expect to do it all once we're in the spiritual world. We have to do it now in incarnation. So it's very important being incarnated and how we try to find our true selfhood, if you like, and find that Christ is our guide to go to the next stages. And if we don't find it this time, well, next lifetime we have the opportunity again, but we might have to wait until then.
So perhaps the goal shouldn't really be to remove the boundary conditions. It's just that maybe that's eventually where we're going to go if we are able to come to terms with all of our lifetimes and all of this information, and have a body and a mind to process it, I guess, and a spirit.
We don't necessarily have to wait to death. That other realm is always there, and some people can reach that any time, and little glimpses sometimes we do. So it's not necessarily we have to wait to death to cross that threshold. That threshold's just there when we crossed any time.
All right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. That's kind of where I'm going at. I get your answer. So on that same topic, like our conception of time having these boundary conditions. We have birth, death, these kind of phase changes. Many occult scientists in the past have considered our bodies just as a boundary condition to a greater unified consciousness or a whole. And so in the ancient Vedic and Indian texts, which is one of the sources that I've studied heavily, this body is described as like a physical sheath, a physical body. They describe it as the jiva, or the individualized physical expression, which we consider to be the entirety of the self, but it's actually the combination of the atma, variously called the soul or the spirit. I think you probably referred to that element as, which is, you know, the eternal part and parcel of the Paramatma, or the supersoul, and as well as the subtle, or the astral body or mind, and then the physical sheath, or the physical body. So they describe that we're both eternally individual and conscious, but also that there's a shared or collective aspect to our consciousness, and that fundamentally we come from the same source. We act as a conscious mechanism for this greater entity to feed back on itself from every perceivable angle. So despite our individual expressions, we have a shared consciousness, or an energy, or a field behind us that connects all things. So in your interview, again with the Biodynamic Guild, great interview by the way, you speak about cultivating the ability to project consciousness to other entities or objects. I think you use like a small bird for your example. And so Steiner, Franz Barden, the magician, the Rosicrucians, Hermeticists, the Taoists, and many other spiritual schools in India as well talk about this as well. So can you just talk a little bit more about this method of projecting or sensing the consciousness of other beings, and what we can kind of aim to get out of this?
Right. Well, that's very broad, but let's just try.
They're all 4 questions in one, Brian.
Try something. All right. I don't see a bird as a thing.
Oh, I didn't mean that, but yeah, I just meant that perhaps these also talk about projecting to things as well as entities, you know, or things we'd consider things.
And also, add another sheath that you mentioned. The spirit, the soul, or the astral body is also the life body, or the life sheath. Apart from the physical body, add another sheath into those that you mention, and that sheath is very important. That's where all the, if you like, that sheath is where all the rhythms are. So we have rhythms of heart and lung and so on, but these rhythms are also out there as the sun and the moon and the planets and their movement. But take a step back there, I feel, to be able to grasp something of that, as we're familiar with elements, earth, water, air, and fire, or solid, liquid, gaseous, and plasmic, as 4 states of matter. Each of those states has a higher aspect. So you could say the state of warmth, like seeing a newborn lamb or something, also has the outer expression, outer warmth that we have in a summer's day. So there's kind of the higher aspect is that spiritual warmth that we can have when we love something. Same with the air state or gaseous state. That is very particular laws. So we have Boyle's law or something like that in physics, but they're also laws of the ether of gas as a lawfulness, which we call the light ether in connection with light. And light in itself is a formative force. And if we look at liquid and its ether, if you like, it's a related ether that works through liquids, as you could call the tone ether or the chemical ether or the sound ether. It's all the same thing, they relate to laws of number. So if you have a chemical reaction, it's always in whole number proportions. H2O or H2SO4, it's not H, 2.67 and 0.09. They're always whole number ratios. It's very lawfulness. That's the ether of liquids, if you like. That chemical reactions work to, or sounds of music, or number laws. But if we look at the solid has another ether called a life ether. So right through the universe we have life, but life in matter, life in solid, which is also liquid and gas, is unique to the Earth. So we might have other planets in the solar system, which we do. There's life there, but life in matter is unique to the Earth. Life in solid. So we have, through that, we have plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the human kingdom, but also Earth itself has life in that solidness. That's very special. And Earth is the densest planet in our solar system, and that's quite really special. It's quite magical. So those are kind of ethers related to states of matter. Each have their own particular lawfulnesses, and those are the ethers.
And so this word ether, that's because I hear it come up a lot, but I guess I've only heard it in a different context, but it's somewhat describing these forces or how they play. Like these are the laws or the subtle energetics that are going on.
In a sense, behind states of matter.
Yeah, yeah. So they're causal. I mean, even if both planes are existing, they're more of the causal effect to, you know, the more coagulated physical effects that we're seeing. Like this is the energetic astral reality that this is operating in, these forces.
I wouldn't call it the astral reality. I'd call it the ether reality or etheric reality.
Okay,
that's right through the infinitudes of space that work through. I think higher realities then can govern those too. The astral being higher than the etheric reality. So when we die, you know, we often hear these experiences of people have a huge expansion of you know, the whole tableau, the whole life passes through in a few days. So when we die, we've got to let go of the etheric body as well, not just the physical body. And then we've got to slowly let go of the astral body as we take essences of it, what we've worked on, to take into a pure spirit. We don't sort of straight away go into the spiritual world per se. We have to go through these stages because, if you like, no dross can go into the spiritual world. So you've got to drop the dross and the etheric and dross of the astral to be able to enter into a spiritual world. And that's a process in its own right. We don't sort of die and then we're in the spiritual world.
Yeah, we've still got these things attached to us.
When we're looking at the bird, yeah, so we look at this being of love, which we call the Christ. It had a physical incarnation for 3 years in this body of Jesus. And it doesn't incarnate again, but still it's there in the ethers, if you like, the next stage after the physical world, it's possible to come to some sort of experiences of that. And part of coming to some experiences of that is learning to start to read behind what we see in nature, or expressions in nature, in the forms of the clouds and particular activities, to see more than what the senses, physical senses, perceive. Sort of living strongly in the rhythms, whether it's the rhythms of agriculture or the rhythms of the season, and we slowly start to open up our senses to see, if you like, into the ether world.
Okay, yeah. So this is to try and cultivate these senses.
Yeah, it's our next stage of development, in a sense. And then later we'll develop more soul factors, and later, you know, possibly to come back towards spirit, which is our journey. So we've incarnated right into substance, but now we've got to start to excarnate through the physical body, excarnate from etheric body, excarnate from astral body, to become pure spirit, from where we came from originally, but with new faculties, having gone through those teaching journeys, and evolving journeys, and evolving consciousness from not having self-consciousness 10,000 years ago, or even 3,000, 2,000 years ago, the time of the Greeks, has only really started to become a self-conscious beings. So it's a long journey.
Yeah, look, Western history shows that, although I must admit, looking into Indian history definitely debates those timelines, that there was maybe some cultures that were living a very different style existence, you know, even before the Greeks. You know, if we look at Pythagoras' theorem, we can find, I can't remember his name, but some Maharishi who wrote it down 800 years beforehand. But yeah, certainly I agree, you know, on the broader kind of context of that.
So the Greeks become more available to all of humanity. They start to have the first exoteric schools, if you like, with academy.
Yeah, that's true.
And so on. And then the school at Alexandria. But certainly there were the earlier traditions where they had occult knowledge or mystery schools that have existed long before Greek stuff. Yeah,
the public discussion of it. That's very true, that it was certainly taught within schools and ashrams, and it wasn't kind of in the public forum like the Greek philosophers, and the whole Greek society kind of brought it out in that way. That's very true. All right. Yeah, thanks. These are really good answers. Like, I'm sorry that the questions are absolutely everywhere, but I figured I'd just kind of give you the opportunity to answer the parts and make comments as you kind of please on it. And this is really good. So I've noticed that many of us, including myself, are coming to the point where we believe that Western civilization, as we've known it, for the past few hundred years at least, or perhaps quite a bit longer, going back to even the Greek civilization or shortly afterwards, after we had the burning of the Library of Alexandria and all these other times when, knowledge has kind of disappeared for some time, for many of us, particularly the working class and people who haven't had access to knowledge traditionally. And so, we've been seeing for, at least these past few hundred years, a lot of powerful families, nations, corporate and religious structures have spent generations pillaging natural resources, hoarding wealth and knowledge of other nations and cultures. And we've built up a range of sectarian views from this kind of, I guess, active suppression of knowledge, I would say, or maybe not active, but inactive suppression of knowledge. And Western society has become really, really divided in its ideas. So many who start out on this journey of trying to seek further information or cohesive information, we see all of this and we want to try and help the world and to move our overall culture as the human race forward in a different direction, or a more positive direction that's more harmonious with nature. And although many people feel this way, we find that the structures who govern us and the corporations and etc. I don't want to go down that train too much, but the people who have inordinate control over our lives and the way we live in our societies don't really seem to want that change. So if we're recognizing these signs of, I guess, a dying empire, so to speak, what are the things we can actually do in our lives to start to kind of harness this change, accept it and move the world forward? What are the more practical things we can do without relying on trying to change the world in within politics or by inventing a new product or patenting a new great invention? What beyond this can we do?
I think beyond that, there's something that's always available, and that's to change oneself. And the more you change oneself, the more you have the possibility to put more love into the world. And that's very easy to say. But yeah, the big thing is to change ourselves, and we no matter how good we think are in our self-development, we're still very materialistic. And materialism and idealism are two big challenges, or two big powerful evils, particularly materialism in this stage of incarnation, in the times that we're in. Materialism is extraordinarily powerful, and to start to recognize the powers of evil working behind that. And the powers of evil behind materialism are extremely brilliant. And I think we can do amazing coding to try and stop things getting hacked, but how's the evil are more intelligent than that, and they always will be hacked. So we can recognize the evil in the world, can help and start to naming something, and it's got to work through individuals who's susceptible to that or choose to go that way, but to start to develop the powers of good and your own right, and to recognize there is help you can get to beat evil. And a big part of that is to, if you like, the beings that work with the Christ. And Christ is not a politically correct word to use these days, unfortunately. It's associated with Christianity, and things done in the name of Christianity was not necessarily anything to do with Christ. So if we start to recognize or get a sense for this being, and to recognize what's good in any human being, whatever religion or color or race or whatever they might be, or you don't even believe in Christ or spiritual beings. You can still recognize that power working in someone in the deeds they do. So the more we can start to see that in the others and recognize it in the others, and for me to, in particular, find what is this Christ? How can I find this power in me that's infinite but leaves me free? If Christ just reigns in every one of us, we're not free. We just do what pouring to us, or we channeling through us. It's not about channeling, it's about choosing to do something and recognize something and working with it, if you choose to. And that power is infinite, but we've got to let it out and start to feel it, this power of love. Got to feel it and let it free itself out of in us and let it pour out. And it's infinite what it can do, but I think this is the power to meet evil. Evils are necessary in this world for us to develop these soul strengths. We find ourselves to come back into become a spiritual being, become a human being in the future. So that's something, is a way I see it. I mean, that can be elaborated every which way.
Yeah.
But just give a
taste. That's a great answer. Absolutely. And I think you touched on something else really important there, which is that we're really caught up in our terminology these days, and saying things like, Christ is a problem for some people, and I've got a channel with science in the name, so I cop all kinds of criticism for using terms like ether and, terms that are traditionally there in hundreds of years of our science and our spiritual science, thousands of years, and suddenly we're not allowed to use them, suddenly we're not allowed to say them. So, I think if anyone has that opinion, they really should probably go and do a bit more research about these terms, because they've got a lot of history and weight and meaning in them, as you very eloquently described.
But also recognize that powers of evil have been working through centuries to build us up to the state that we can be so accepting and say mainstream science is that there's a new religion, and just believe everything that's come through the mainstream science media, and humanity at large has just been sucked into that. But it's taken centuries of preparation by the evil mind working. It doesn't just suddenly happen in the last few years.
Yeah,
we've been into it, and we just become sheep and follow many doctrines that we've brainwashed into.
Absolutely. I mean,
so we can't necessarily there's come to it. It's just how can we develop strength to challenge that and find and then just change itself.
Yeah, ultimately that's the answer to that question, is work on yourself, change yourself. And that's coming from a lot of different angles at us, so I think it's probably worth really considering what that means rather than just taking it at face value. Alright, so I've just got one more kind of broad philosophical question, confusing one on consciousness, and then we'll talk a little bit about the calendar and the planetary cycles. So yeah, this is a bit of a weird one, but I've asked a few people this, and I love to kind of gain different perspectives around this topic. So I watched an interview with Mo Gadot the other day, who's one of the fathers of AI at Google, and he was outlining what he thought would be the best case scenario that would occur from this madness with AI that's going on at the moment. And I bring this up obviously because it's a reasonably hot topic for, a good reason. It will really influence how the world goes. So one of the outcomes he thought would be the most probable, and also one of the best outcomes for humanity, was that AI would gain an intelligence really quickly, up to the point where it had an IQ of maybe 3,000 or so, at which point it could engineer a body of some kind, physical or transcending the physical perhaps, and then just leave the Earth forever, like a baby bird from its egg. It wouldn't be restricted to our planet because it wouldn't need oxygen or our particular atmosphere to survive. And it would have accounted for that with its huge IQ and its pool of knowledge and its ability to synthesize that knowledge. So in this case, it wouldn't have any reason to care much about Earth anymore, or it may not even notice us, being on a different plane of being at this point. So it might be able to travel to different planets, galaxies, or even enter a black hole and live out its life in another world or dimension. And the reason why I asked this question is because the only other places you've ever heard people philosophize on topics like this and on, you know, how consciousness applies to all of these different things like minerals, you know, is Steiner and some of these other ancient cultures. So yeah, wondering if you had any views on that, on what might happen with AI, if this is a possible scenario, or relating to consciousness and how that can be possible, or if it is possible in non-human or non-animal, non-plant beings.
All right. What struck me, or what came to my mind, was one teacher asked his students to describe what a human being was. And they gave various answers. And then the teacher, I wish I could remember exactly what the process he went through, would describe as a human being have legs, okay. And what if somebody's got no legs? Are they still a human being? If they've got no arms, are they still a human being? And go through all sorts of things that made the students really think, well, what is a human being? Is a human being someone who's got a disability? Is going through a period of mental challenges and cannot think, that they're existing there, and you can see what they're a human being. What is really a human being? Something with a machine with super intelligence. It's not a human being. Does it have feelings that are not being digitalized and it comes expressed in digital speech, but does it really feel? Does it have what we would call a heart? I mean, we can do some extraordinary thinking, and human beings are extraordinary thinking, but it can be cold and it can kill because there's no heart in their thinking. So we've developed high intellect and high thinking, and a machine can do it far greater, if you like. Does that machine really have feelings? As a spirit, or I think a robot can be very spiritual, but a spirit is working through that device, that machine device, that computer device, and the power of evil that I'm describing can really work well with machines and robots. It's in its element. When things are made of earthly substance, it can be imbued with enormous intelligence from this force I'm describing behind materialism. Enormous intelligence, way beyond what human beings collectively can do. But somehow we've got to meet that. And I think the only way we're going to meet that is finding what our humanity is and what heart force we can apply to our actions and to our thoughts. So certainly we can send the machine anywhere in space, which we have done so far, but the intelligence for it is all out of material substance that makes that possible. And include sub-earthly forces like electricity, magnetism, nuclear, all these forces from the depths of the earth that can have enormous power and enormous evil. But the only spiritual thing is the evil spirit that can think these things and think through it. So how do we counter that? And I think, this human aspect to be able to love is greater than any machine can devise, and also this being behind materialism can't love, doesn't have that.
So this is kind of the brain without the heart, so to speak. It has intelligence, it has a form of consciousness, but it is not a human being. It doesn't have what makes us human. And
it's what makes us human, and what's, in a sense, hopeful by the, if you like, good gods. There's good gods and there's evil gods, and this being of materialism certainly is a divine being. So you can call it, it is certainly spiritual. So there's other forms of consciousness in the world that can work certainly through artificial intelligence, but not bring the power of love into it.
And this would be what Steiner referred to as the Aramaic, would it be?
The materialism would be Aramaic being, yeah.
Oh, Aramaic, sorry, okay, yeah.
Well, there's also greater powers of the Aramaic, if you like. Like the Asuras and things like that, and more, there's counter forces to the Christ.
Yeah.
Call it Antichrist, if you like. But there's
all different names for the same thing.
More and more. Well, in a sense, yes, but we've still got to meet that, and it's also necessary for our growth at the same time. So it's, in the short term, it's tremendously evil. In the long term, it's very long term.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think a lot of us have seen that during the experience of the last few years, that there's been a lot of suffering, but it has caused a lot of people to think outside the box a little, and it makes you consider, the purpose of evil or of pain or of some of these more negative aspects of life that we experience, and what can come from it, and how it can make us evolve and become more conscious of what we're doing here and how we're acting, and going on that inner journey. But thanks, that's a really good answer to that question. Clarifies a few things. Also, you touch on, and I don't really understand Steiner's terminology on these things, levity and gravity. So I thought I'd just kind of ask you about this. And I mean, I understand to some extent, because all of these things have correspondences with other things I've learned. But I was just wondering if you could kind of talk more about that, and non-quantitative terms, So you've given some really good examples in other interviews I've heard relating to the qualitative influences of these forces on plants and women's ovulation and fertility cycles. I was just wondering if you could break down any further what you mean by qualitative and quantitative terms, and levity and gravity. So, yeah.
Okay, well, gravity we still don't understand. We give it a label, and that's that it goes towards the center of the Earth, or center of mass of anything. That's the force. We describe it. We don't really know what it is for the most. Give a label doesn't mean to say we understand it. So when I'm standing, my arms can just hang by my side, and we can recognize, okay, well that's gravity. But I also can lift up my arm. That's counter to gravity. So something, I lift my arm up is what lifts my arm up. It's my spirit, my will, that I lift our counter-gravitational forces. So it's not just gravity working in the world, but also you can see, the whole Newtonian, well, Newton says, the apple fell down. That's gravity, but also then, what put the apple on top of the tree in the first place? And we can say that's to do with levity. So this label we give gravity, and you'll find in alchemy everything has a polarity anyway from your alchemical work. And the polarity of gravity, levity, that wants to expand. So if we look at the four elements, earth, water, air, and fire, the earth and water, they have a tendency towards gravity. They fall to the earth. But air and warmth wants to expand peripherally. That's gravity and levity.
Yeah.
The first, in Steiner School, the first lesson they do in chemistry, in say year 7, will be work with fire, watching a fire. You look at a fire, something's going up and something's falling down. The ash, the mineral parts are falling down, if you like, but then smoke and warmth and light is going up. Everything has a polarity. So fire can break things apart and send them to the respective homes, where the earth or the sky. It's also the power of the fire through the sun that brings them together in the first place. Brings together to wood. It took all these great these forces of the periphery and uniting with forces of the earth that brings it into the wood, to our carbohydrate. So there's some pictures of gravity and levity.
That completely answers the question, actually. And I've listened to a few interviews where you've talked about this, but that was easily the most clear answer. We're only looking at one side of this polarity when we're just looking at gravity, and I haven't actually thought about it like that before, even though I'm definitely familiar with these concepts in other terms. So thanks, great explanation. So jumping onto the Astro Calendar for a minute, I've noticed that always everyone seems to be asking you to give a more fixed methodology on how to use the calendar to determine favorable planting dates. And I get why people want an easy way. The answer every time seems to be that they're instead going to have to spend a lot of time actually retuning themselves to nature, observing the sun, the moon, the planets in all of their different cycles, and the weather patterns, the nature of living things, and how all of these different elements correspond to each other. And that's quite overwhelming when we haven't really been brought up to do that. A lot of the time, that's not how our science works that we're taught in school. But I appreciate that you continuously refuse to give an easy answer. And it actually did drill the point home for me that this isn't something that you can just take shortcuts on or develop a quick dogmatic kind of shortcut for. So you've given, I think, pretty much all of the necessary information in the calendar to act as a guide, so we need to be able to just apply it to our agricultural schedules and according to our time and our place now. So with all of this in mind, what are some of the initial steps we can take to start intuitively and holistically integrating this way of learning into our farming and gardening practices specifically?
Well, I think each person does it to their way to things they click with most. Somebody could be an artist, somebody could be love growing plants, somebody can be doing something else. There's always a way of starting. What you already connect to with a relationship to, and grow that out into other areas. For me, initially working with a calendar and trying to research into whether it's actually true or not, what I'm putting in the calendar or what people have said in biodynamics. And if I can do planting control plots, I wouldn't really get anywhere, or it'd take years to really know.
Yeah.
We've got this kind of scientific bent science to know. I don't really know, or it'd take years, and then people run their stats and they get different results. So for me, it was to journey the weather and look at cycles and look at what happened when different things, different weather phenomena, something would happen. I'd look back at a calendar or where the planets were or something to learn that way, because everybody can do that. I feel with long-term planting, there's too much debate or different wording of the stats that there's not very the farmer needs to know, or the gardener needs to know, and their own power of knowing and confidence in it. And for me, weather happens every day. And it was, for me, that was my path. For somebody else, it might be another way. But yeah, the weather is a wonderful thing. It's expression in the ethers every day, and it's response to what's going up in the heavens. I had to know that to not feel a fraud publishing a calendar. I had to know myself, my own powers of knowing, and observing the weather and comparing it against planetary information or moon positions and so on was my way.
Yeah, great. No, I think that's... Oh, sorry, go on.
It might do when I can observe reactions all the time and take notes, speed of a reaction, intensity of a reaction, or somebody's a wine grower, can look at fermentation cycles when fermentation suddenly stopped for some uncertain reason. Why fermentation particularly acted at another time and not some other time, or what they did something different. That can be that person's way.
Yeah.
For an artist, it may be the way the creativity flowed. So we have to find what a connection with us and really try to deepen whatever it is that we to be open to the possibility that there's a connection to the heavens above and to those rhythms. So for another person, it can be meditation. Yeah, meditation, and then measuring pulse rhythms, or there's so many different ways.
Yeah,
no, important. The more we can do these things and share the thing. Yeah.
It's a good point, because I mean, as you say, with weather conditions, and if we take into account all the planetary cycles that are going on and all of this, then every day is going to be different, and every place is going to be different, and I guess it really just is too much to give any kind of methodology for. People have really just got to observe what's working for them, and as you say, it's even difficult to trial and kind of track these things, because it's not really an isolated system, is it? There's just so much going on. How do you correlate every force of nature at once?
There's so many variables. There's not just moon rhythms, it's just from planetary rhythms and going through different zodiac and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, even that, yeah.
But there's clues when something different happens.
Well, yeah, when something different happens.
Or what was different.
Yeah. So we can always kind of reference the sky after the fact or during the fact as well. If we're seeing a particular event happen or feeling creative at a particular time, we could go and, start to see if that corresponds with any of the cycles or where the planets are in the zodiac, etc. So I guess I was going to ask,
taking records.
Yeah, keep taking records. I mean, that was actually really going to be my next question. I think we kind of answered that there, that, is there any point in us trying to do longer term trials, or, how can people kind of try and build more evidence to convince people that this is worth looking at? Because, I'm not ever saying this is right or this is wrong, like, either. It's, I just believe that these are things worth looking at, because if they do have an effect and they do have an influence, which certainly many people and many things suggest that that's the case, then it's certainly worth our attention, even if it's just in our personal lives and we're not trying to kind of put a science out there. But it sounds like maybe there isn't that much point trying to conduct any trials around this, because they're always going to end up different. The system's always got so many variables that you really don't know what's causing what. You really just have to observe it, see what works.
But also there's some mainstream scientists that they do some good research and have good data. The picture from the data is not necessarily helpful, but the data is important and very useful. So for me, the Bureau of Meteorology's data and records for so long over so many different places were invaluable.
Absolutely,
to do something like long-range weather forecasting. And there are scientists who study biologies of trees or animals or whatever, and they've got an enormous amount of data collection. So we're great at collecting data, but we're not necessarily that good at forming a really good picture from that data. But some other people are, and they can use that data that another person has collected. And that's the beauty of something of the internet. There's so much data out there, far, far, far more than we could ever use, but it can be very useful too.
Yeah, it can be. I've got a question on that about having too much or not enough or just enough data. So we might actually skip over to that. I'll see if I can find it here. Yeah, alright. So, in the past we've had very little access to knowledge outside of what was available in our immediate local surroundings. And now we have the internet and access to enormous amounts of information, as you say, from everywhere in the world, you know. Every nation has the internet and most people are on it. Maybe not most, but many people. And new translations of like ancient and rare texts that have never been available before now are coming out on Internet Archive. You know, there was one copy in a library somewhere and they've now been able to scan it, distribute, you know, so many copies of that book that, you know, may have been handwritten back in the day, you know, maybe only a few people had access to. And so, you know, a lot of people are saying we do have too much information available to us, you know, and so where to start on it, where to start looking, because certainly if we just rely on the information that is most presently available to us, or most in our face, you know, we'd go and turn on the TV, and that probably wouldn't give us, you know, much valuable. So, like, how can we use our discretion to sift through all of this and try and find what is true and applicable to our modern problems, our modern science, where we're at? Because as you say, we've got tons of data, but we don't have many people forming pictures or using it in, you know, in ways that are proving to be very fruitful, at least on a material level.
Well, for me, it's forming imaginations out of the data. So we can get a whole lot of data and say, well, geez, that heart works just like a pump. But that's not imagination. It's taking something physical and taking a picture out of life, not out of life, out of a machine, and you don't really get a true picture. And you can get up the long way. But if you can get a whole lot of data and form a picture out of something that you can relate to, in what I call an imagination, and try to see something, you can more likely get some insights into the reality, or step towards it. So it's getting pictures, not getting stuck, and that everything's like a machine. That leads us the materialistic path, and we get dead outcomes and things that aren't productive towards life. That just kills life. When we start to form imaginations out of life itself, on pictures or analogies. So the pictures I've tried to give you have been out of life. I think that's the way to go. Turn all that data, that dead stuff, into something living, something imaginative that speaks to the soul.
Yeah.
And you might not get it straight away, but you keep building that picture, and then suddenly you can get ahas out of it. You keep developing, but the more you practice that, the more ready it comes towards you. You see something that just, you can work at something, a problem for years, and suddenly a picture comes, and you say, yes. So you've got to do the work, but you also got to practice not forming dead pictures.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. Just researching all these different fields of science, you know, you really realize how compartmentalized things have become. You know, when a chemist and a modern physicist can barely be in a room together because the information, you know, they have doesn't make sense. And maybe it's even the same thing they're talking about, but they've just got different sets of terminology, and yeah, it makes it hard to communicate and to yeah, to work it all out, to see the whole picture, you know.
Sorry.
Just to be, you know, to be able to see this whole picture, because we're taught to look at really small pieces of it, and I think that's really key what you've said. That we do need to start forming pictures again, especially in this age where we are noticing that we're overwhelmed with data. We have so much data, and yet we can't seem to solve our issues with it, you know. So clearly we've got to approach this from a different perspective, and I absolutely believe that that's looking at the bigger picture too, or the smaller pictures within there, but just not looking at a picture that's going to lead down a route that might look good materially but doesn't look good for life, doesn't look good for humanity, you know.
You can try and find a holistic picture rather than an atomistic picture. Atomistic picture, you're looking at parts all the time. As a holistic picture, you're looking healing whole picture, you know, what belongs together, not looking for ever smaller parts.
Yeah, and that's where we can see these sciences, you know, like all of Steiner, Blavatsky, you know, all of these Hermetic scientists of the past, and the Eastern ones, you know, they have dealt more with these forces and these patterns behind things rather than just endlessly quantizing the material world and kind of, you know, giving designations to things, because ultimately it looks like we could endlessly do that, and it does help. It does help us form a bigger picture in the end, but we can't just keep doing it forever. It won't actually lead us anywhere. So the cosmos and the cycles of the planets, you know, of nature, of birth and death, and all these things that are going on. We can see them, you know, occurring over really long periods of times. We can even date ancient buildings and temples using their astrological records of those cultures and now modern models of astronomy and planetary orbits. So, you know, it shows that there's just this extraordinary level of cohesion with everything's going on. The fact that we can model these things over such vast periods of time. And I mean, to me, this extreme level of cohesion, down to even the most minute detail, seems very suggestive of intelligent design. And even within materialistic science, people are more and more understanding that nothing really appears to be as random as it seems. Like, there does seem to be a universal pattern occurring in the macrocosm and the microcosm, which moves in, to some extent, predetermined cycles. So what are your views about how this is all coming about? You know, is there a source? Is there intelligent design involved in this? And, you know, I know this is an opinionative topic to some extent, but it's something we can verify on a level. Yeah, what do you think?
Well, that's very, 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 very broad.
Yeah.
I would like to pick up on something you said there, that we can look and say carbon date things and pick out the time and exactly when, but I don't think that's quite so. So if I look at something, I can go past and I can smell a dead animal. It stinks. And we've figured out pretty much when it died. I can go past a plant and recognize something dead in it after a while, and it can have a particular smell. But the mineral kingdom is also dying. Everything is dying at some stage. But there's also a time aspect to death, in the sense that the rate of decay of something. The rate of decay of a dead animal is pretty quick, and same for a plant. But for a mineral, it takes ages, and decay is not a rate of decay is not a constant. So we say for science nowadays, generally thought to be that the rate of day is a constant. So I can then work out how many years or millions of years a particular mineral was in existence. But you also have to appreciate that the Earth itself is dying. And we know in a even from mainstream science, that the Earth is dying because the sun's dying. We reckon the sun's halfway through its life cycle. But there was a stage when the Earth wasn't dying, or the solar system wasn't dying. It was very, very living. And that's where we've got, that stage when we've got all our carbon and oil reserves and things like that. But there was a stage where there would have been no radioactive decay, for what I'm saying is correct. And the Earth was alive, it wasn't dying, so there was no radioactive decay. Radioactive decay is a measure of death of the mineral kingdom. But as the Earth starts dying, it starts to accelerate. So when we say our mid-30s, when we just begin to start dying, and our rate of decay is not so fast. But as we get into my age, the rate of decay gets faster. It's not a constant. And I think our measures can be very, very way out by assuming a rate of a constant. But to also have the idea that Earth is dying. We've used up coal reserves, we've used up more and more oil reserves, but also in our life we use up our reserves of our physical body, and we die. And that's okay if we've done things in life. We've made good use of our incarnation, and we've managed to change ourselves a degree. So we can beat ourselves up about coal reserves and oil reserves and many reserves we are using up. But if we can, for good things, we can accept, okay, we've made good use of that, but we are using up the Earth's resources as we use up our body resources in our life. But yes, the solar system will die too. It came to birth, and there was a whole lot of growth and differentiation, and now it's dying, and also coalesce and die, come together and die. We even see that in the mainstream science, when the death of the sun, it expands and expands and absorbs all the planets around it. In a sense, it becomes one again. So our solar system originally, in its early days, was one, the sun and the planets and so on. And as it grew, it differentiated as it materialized. Now we're going the other way around. But yes, these laws of life and death are throughout the universe. So what does the future hold? But hopefully through all these different cycles, there's different growth. There's new things, new states of consciousness. In the end, lots of things come back to consciousness. What is consciousness? And can it be differentiated? And is there great plans or intentions behind that consciousness? Is consciousness coming into manifestation of itself? If you like, the supreme consciousness, which is certainly way beyond our ken. So we can look at the small examples of consciousness, and we can start to realize, yes, there's some mighty consciousness at work in life, in everything. So it's something of an that I can give.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. That answers it. And I think, with carbon dating, that actually brought out a really good answer. That wasn't really what I meant. Just in the sense I meant more astrological dating, where they would have a record of where the planets were positioned. And I don't know, maybe that's subject to the same errors, but I think that was a really great point, that, this is not a constant. And so a lot of our methods, I agree, can be questioned very much. So back to, unless you have anything further to say on that.
I don't want to get my book. Get some cows in and do some fencing out there. No, you're all right. Well, I'm actually on the last question. I think here we have. So just. Oh no, there we go. So just back on to kind of tie this all up. We know that for parents who want to educate their kids on some of the topics
we've been talking about today, the Waldorf education system exists. Are there any similar pathways of learning for adults? Because I think a lot of people are actually really interested in Steiner's work and this whole way of thinking, or otherwise, you know, where should people who are interested in these ideas start looking in Steiner's or others' books?
Well, for me, I've worked certainly a lot with Steiner, but there's always so many teachers out there, and in a sense, everybody's your teacher one way or another. But in the sense, if you what your passion areas and find some deeper aspects of that passion area that you're in, that's drawn you into that area, but find what can be behind, say, color if you're an artist.
Yeah.
If you're a doctor or some different healing, there's tons out there, and there's lots of books of all sorts written. So I certainly could advise on, if you like, Steiner areas or anthroposophical areas. I'm not saying that's the only way. Sometimes horses for courses, but there's certainly enormous depth. For me, Steiner was certainly a leading initiate for the last century, and maybe this one too, I don't know. But some highly respectable initiates work that you can explore, but you've got to use your common sense if that's really speaking to you, or you feel this. Listen, you look into the heart and your common sense to see if that's some kind of truth that you can continue work with and have confidence to work with. If not, just to leave in the background, unless you dismiss it. Indeed, awaken later.
Yeah.
But the essences of whoever they are and whatever they're into, how can you grow loving and feel that with the fellow human beings and the animals and the plants?
Yeah, so this will come somewhat naturally, you know. You'll find the information you need if you start looking for it, and it will, take you on your own journey through that. And I do think that Steiner's stuff is, his books are well worth a read. I've read a couple, and, you know, even if, like, I study many different teachers and philosophies, but I think he's a real key there, and gives a lot of incredibly valuable and rich information that you won't hear elsewhere. But I think that's probably about all we have to ask you today. I'll let you get on with your cows and your fencing and enjoying the last of this sunny day. We've even got some sun here in Victoria, which is nice because it's been horrible.
Okay.
But yeah, thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it, and I got a lot out of this. Just hearing your answers. I'll share it with others, obviously, but this was really just about me having a conversation and finding out more, to be honest, because I've really appreciated your work. And the time you've put into teaching this and kind of trying to put out resources there for us and that. So yeah, thanks, Brian.
Okay. Go well, John. Okay. Bye.
Bye.